Feral children, children who, through either accident or deliberate isolation, have grown up with limited human contact. Such children have often been seen as inhabiting a boundary zone between human and animal existence. For this reason, the motif of the child reared by animals is a recurring theme in myth. In the modern era, feral children have been seen as providing a window for the scientific study of fundamental human traits, such as language use. During the 20th century, psychologists endeavored to distinguish between behaviorism and biological nature. Wild children, a designation including children in isolation as well as those who survived among animals, again seem to provide a key to the puzzle. On March 6, 1932, a baby girl was born in Fayette County to Martha Harris, the unwed 27-year-old daughter of a prosperous farmer from Perryopolis. The relationship between Martha and her widowed father, 56-year-old David Arthur Harris, had been contentious for over a year when Martha became pregnant and gave birth to an illegitimate baby boy named John. A second child born out of wedlock, so soon after the first, would only add further shame to the Harris name, and so the infant girl, christened Alice Marie, was taken to the Fayette County home in Uniontown. When applying for her 3-month-old daughter's admission to the children's wing, administrators of the county home needed Martha to provide information about the baby's father, but she refused to provide a name, only admitting that the father of both her children was a 75-year-old neighbor who was a well-to-do farmer from Perry Township. Less than a month later, Alice Marie was placed in the home of a family friend, but was eventually returned to her mother. Years passed, but very little was seen of Alice Marie. Neither Martha nor her father spoke of her, not even her brother mentioned her. It was almost as if the child had never existed. Rumors started spreading about a child who had been kept secret, and people learned about Alice. On January 12, 1938, officers from the Western Pennsylvania Humane Society went to Perryopolis to look into the situation. When they arrived at the Harris family's farmhouse, they were horrified by what they found. In a storage room on the second floor, they discovered 5-year-old Alice Marie tied to a wooden rocking chair with her arms strapped above her head. The room was extremely dirty and neglected. Alice was severely malnourished, and her body showed signs of serious health problems. Her bones were soft and misshapen due to rickets, a condition that had worsened because she had been kept alone for so long. She couldn't move her arms or legs, and her ability to speak was gone. Instead, she communicated with the officers through painful facial expressions, showing the extent of her suffering and neglect. The officers remarked that it was one of the most horrible cases of child cruelty they had ever encountered. They ordered Alice's mother and grandfather to bathe the child at once and place her into a bed, while they quietly made plans to rescue Alice from her hellish prison and bring formal charges of neglect and abuse against Martha and David Harris. But this, however, would take time. Parental rights being what they were at that time in rural parts of the country, rushing in and removing a sickly, crippled minor was a proposition fraught with peril. The Humane Society had to tread carefully. One careless move, and there would be no legal basis for the child's removal. They warned the child's mother and grandfather that they had better shape up and fix things, and said that they would return to follow up. On the morning of February 4, 1938, Chief Inspector Edwin M. Smith and Agent M.J. Teeter returned to the Harris home, bringing along probation officer Helen Reagan. They found that Alice had been cleaned up and moved to a bedroom, but when they uncovered the blanket, it was clear that little had been done to improve her living situation or health. Alice's back was covered in large bed sores, indicating severe neglect, and the sheets she lay on were dirty and had not been washed. It became apparent that Alice was unable to eat solid food. In fact, she had never been given anything but milk since she was born. This lack of proper nutrition had taken a toll on her body and health. One of the officers expressed disbelief at Alice's survival, saying, "It's a miracle how the child could have lived so long under such conditions." With great concern, they took Alice to Uniontown Hospital for a thorough examination, hoping to provide her with the care she desperately needed. The hospital staff prepared for her arrival, knowing the extent of her suffering and the urgent need for medical attention. Questioning revealed the obvious, that poor little Alice had been unwanted from the moment she was born. Passed from hand to hand for the first few months of her life, she returned to Martha Harris at 6 months of age and was placed in a stiff-backed wooden chair in the dark, windowless attic which had been her prison ever since. If the child had ever known a normal life, she surely would have died. The fact that this waking nightmare was the only life of which she had any knowledge permitted her lungs to keep breathing, her tiny heart to continue beating. Quite simply, Alice didn't know any better than to keep on living. When pressed for an explanation, Alice's grandfather said that he didn't want the child around the house because she had been born out of sin. "One mistake might be forgiven," he said, referring to his 7-year-old grandson, "but there's no use in it happening again." As for the girl's mother, she insisted that she didn't know any better, for she was just a simple farm girl who did as her father instructed. Almost as soon as Alice Marie Harris was in the safe confines of a hospital, she began to thrive. The frail, blue-eyed girl, known affectionately as Brick to hospital staff because of her bright red hair, clung ferociously to the toys and rag doll that were provided to her while doctors D.F. Newell and J. French Kerr performed their examination. But when a steady stream of well-wishers besieged the hospital, Alice became overwhelmed and frightened. She had never seen so many people in a single room before. Satisfied that Alice's condition wasn't immediately life-threatening, she was transferred to the children's wing of the Fayette County Home, to a bed placed beside a window where she could benefit from the sunlight. According to her nurse, Marietta Jackson, Alice was responding quickly to treatment and had only made a sound when she was placed in a tub for a bath. Within a few days, she was taking liquid nourishment, but only while lying on her back. Although attempts to feed mashed potatoes to the emaciated youngster failed, Alice was soon able to swallow a watery grain porridge, which the nurses supplemented with fruit and vegetable juice. Alice seemed to enjoy the juice, but responded with whines and a grumpy face whenever nurses at the county home attempted to slip cod liver oil into her liquid diet. The nurses were thrilled by Alice's petulance, however. It was exactly the type of reaction a child should display when given a spoonful of the unpleasant substance. With proper care, this child should develop into a normal, healthy girl within a year, predicted the Fayette County home physician, Dr. James Van Gilder. Probation officer Helen Reagan told reporters that her plan was to have Alice Mary Harris committed to the Polk State School, later known as the Polk Center, for the developmentally disabled, but this plan never came to fruition. Martha Harris and her father were charged with cruel and barbarous treatment of a child and were summoned to appear before Magistrate Fred Monk. On Monday, February 7th, they arrived in Connellsville for their initial court appearance. They decided to waive their preliminary hearing and were released on a $1,000 bond while they awaited the grand jury's decision. District Attorney James A. Riley, who was handling the prosecution, emphasized the seriousness of the charges, noting that a conviction could result in a prison sentence of up to 2 years. To defend themselves, Martha and David Harris hired attorney J.K. Spurgeon, who instructed them not to speak to the press. When approached by reporters, Spurgeon maintained a calm demeanor, smiling politely, and asserted that the case should be resolved in the courtroom, not in the media. On February 28th, while the grand jury met in Uniontown to review the charges, District Attorney Riley ordered a psychiatric evaluation for Martha Harris at Torrance State Hospital. This evaluation aimed to assess her mental state in light of the allegations. Just a day later, on March 1st, just before Alice's 6th birthday, a Fayette County grand jury officially indicted both Martha and David Harris on charges of child cruelty. Judge Horatio Dumbald then ordered them to stand trial, marking the beginning of a significant legal battle ahead. The community was left in shock, eager to see justice served for the suffering of Alice. The Commonwealth's case against David Harris was brought to court on Monday, March 14th, with Judge W. Russell Carr presiding. The case against Martha Harris, who initially was to be tried jointly with her father, was put on hold pending the findings of the Torrance State Hospital psychiatric report. The defense's motion to have the indictment quashed due to negative publicity was immediately overruled by Judge Carr, and a jury comprised of 5 women and 7 men was selected. The first witness called was M.J. Teeter of the Western Pennsylvania Humane Society. Teeter testified to the conditions of the Harris home during his investigation, as did the next witness, Chief Agent Edwin M. Smith. Photographs of Alice and her living conditions were presented as evidence. Also taking the stand was probation officer Helen Reagan. Mr. Harris said he knew he was doing wrong, but if he didn't come down on Martha, there would be more children in the home, she testified. Mrs. Reagan also explained that Harris had told her he would gladly pay for the child's transportation to a state-run institution, but had refused to pay the boarding costs. After the probation officer's testimony, the defense entered a demurrer challenging the sufficiency of the testimonial evidence, essentially the legal equivalent of saying, "Yeah? So what?" The jury never even got a chance to deliberate. Judge Carr abruptly dismissed the case, ruling that the Commonwealth's testimony alone was insufficient. On Tuesday, the case against Martha Harris was presented by District Attorney Riley. After a fierce argument between the prosecution and the defense, Alice Mary was presented to the jury. She squirmed and cried in the arms of a probation officer as her bare, spindly limbs were bared for all to see. As soon as the jury completed its inspection, Alice was returned to the county home, and Milo R. Stevens of the Torrance State Hospital took the stand to report his findings. According to Stevens, a staff pathologist, he had given Martha an intelligence test designed for an 8-year-old child and determined that Martha's results indicated a very low mentality. The defense objected, pointing out that Stevens was not a physician and was therefore unable to make such a determination. Judge Carr overruled the objection. Also taking the stand for the prosecution was Dr. Kerr of Connellsville, who stated that the child's condition, both mental and physical, was the most deplorable he had seen in his 37 years as a practicing physician. He said that records indicated that Alice Marie Harris had been born perfectly healthy, but when he examined her at the county home, she weighed only 31 pounds, had the expression of an imbecile, and, for all intents and purposes, was unable to see or hear. Judge Carr granted the defense a continuance, and the case against Martha Harris was postponed until the June term of court. Charges of cruelty and neglect were later dropped on account of Martha's low intelligence, and Alice's mother and grandfather never faced any punishment for their barbaric actions, not even a small fine. By the end of summer, the child known as Brick had started eating soft foods and had gained 7 pounds, a positive sign in her recovery. However, she still couldn't walk or speak, highlighting the significant challenges she faced. It became evident that Alice would require specialized care for possibly the rest of her life, along with extensive rehabilitation that the staff at the Fayette County home were not equipped to provide. According to Mrs. Meade, the matron of the county home, Alice had shown considerable improvement in her physical health, yet her mental development was equivalent to that of an 8-month-old infant. In August, Alice was placed in the care of a foster parent, a 60-year-old widow named Jenny Rowan. Mrs. Rowan, along with Eleanor Mecklenburg, a secretary from the Child Welfare Bureau, began making arrangements to enroll Alice in the Margaret Dewar Judge School in Milford. This institution was one of only 2 private schools in Pennsylvania designed specifically for children with developmental disabilities. This school is one of the finest private institutions for children like Alice Harris, Miss Mecklenburg explained. Each child receives individual attention and specialized care tailored to their unique needs. The goal is to help them reach their fullest potential and to integrate them as much as possible with their peers. The progress made by the students here is truly remarkable. With these new plans in place, There was a renewed sense of hope for Alice's future, as she would finally receive the appropriate support and education she needed to thrive. Alice remained with Jenny Rowan through the holidays. She had never heard of Christmas or Santa Claus, and Mrs. Rowan reported that the girl laughed and waved her arms as she played with other children during a Christmas party. Her eyes sparkled with joy. "We'll have a Christmas tree for her, but we haven't decided on gifts," she explained to reporters in December. "The child is wild about a little toy dog, but I don't think she is inclined to like toys. She prefers to get her arms and legs in motion," explained Mrs. Rowan. "She walks a little if you lead her, and she can stand alone for a few seconds. Alice is no trouble at all. She doesn't cry except when she had been on her feet for too long. She sits down and scoots about the house, taking care of herself." Alice was enrolled in the Margaret Dewar Judge School for Exceptional Children in September of 1939 and taken to Milford by child welfare officers. Mrs. Judge sent progress reports to Fayette County authorities and in January remarked that Alice was making encouraging progress on her long road to rehabilitation. Within a year, Alice was able to walk under her own power and was even beginning to speak. She learned all the colors of the rainbow and was able to pronounce their names, and she was capable of bathing herself and brushing her teeth. And then, from out of nowhere, misfortune reared its cruel head. While Mrs. Rowan's decision to send Alice to the Margaret Dewar Judge School was made with the best of intentions, it resulted in tragedy. In the summer of 1942, Alice, now 10 years of age, suffered an attack of jaundice, which later developed into pneumonia. Alice Marie Harris died on August 5th. Not surprisingly, Martha and David Harris expressed little emotion over the child's death, and they refused to claim Alice's body, which was laid to rest on August 10th, more than 300 miles from the place of her birth, in a hillside graveyard near Dingman's Ferry, overlooking the Delaware River. Only 3 people were on hand as the tiny coffin was placed in an unmarked grave: Reverend Harry Fenwick, Undertaker Colin S. Black, and Margaret Dewar Judge. Only one floral arrangement was placed on the grave, sent by Jenny Rowan, who was devastated by the news of Alice's death and unable to travel the long distance. As the Harris wanted nothing to do with the matter, and the widow Rowan was in no financial circumstances to pay for the funeral, the bill for Alice's burial was footed by the Fayette County Commissioners. Not long after her acquittal, Martha Harris married a man from Lebanon County named George Irvin Eisenhower and left the area, eventually settling near Philadelphia. She passed away in 1959 at the age of 57. Her son, John, died in Perryopolis at the age of 47. As for Martha's father, he died in 1948 at the age of 71. David never remarried after his wife's death in 1929, and since Martha was the only child still living at home at the time of Alice Marie's discovery 9 years later, rumors circulated for years that he was really the father of both of Martha's children. This claim, however, has never been proven and might have been merely a result of public hostility toward the Harrises after their acquittal. Yet, one has to wonder about the motivation behind Martha's staunch refusal to divulge the name of the man who fathered her children. Perhaps the man was married, or perhaps he had been shunned by the community as an unsavory character. One also has to wonder why David Harris allowed Martha's firstborn illegitimate child to roam freely about the house, while demanding the second be tied up and cruelly imprisoned in a windowless room. His excuse of forgiving the first mistake but punishing the second seems somewhat suspicious, considering that an innocent child wasn't just punished, but tortured. The question as to the father's identity, other than an old, well-to-do farmer, which would have been an apt description of David Harris himself, will probably never be answered. At any rate, while Alice Marie's mother, father, and grandfather have disappeared into the chasm of the forgotten, the sweet, little red-haired child is still remembered, not just in Pennsylvania, but across the country.